In this video, I'm going to show you the 6 core data types that we're going to be using along with practical examples. And first up, we have strings, which are used to represent any text variables. To give you a live demo, if I come in here and just choose the trigger manually, followed by an edit fields, here we're going to see our input on the left, which you don't need to be concerned with for now. But if we come in here, here is where we're going to set in our variables. And the edit fields node is basically where we manipulate and transform our data. So if I wanted to enter a string variable, this field has three key parts to it. It has a name, a value, and a type. So the type, as you can see, have 5 of the core types that we're going to be discussing. There are string, number, boolean, array, and object. We're going to look at these one at a time with an example of this employee sheet that I have and how would we represent this data in n8n. So first up, I would enter, say, an ID column. So I would have an ID. Now, assuming we have only numbers in our column, we're going to have this as 1. Then we're going to add a new field for the name. We have John. The value is going to be John and the type will be strings. So strings are used to represent all text data. Next, we have the age column, which is going to be 25. So 25 is a number. So we're going to change this to a number. And just here, I wanted to pause and run this so that you can see what the output looks like. So our ID was 1, our name is John, and our age is 25. So one thing you'll notice is in this view, you have your input on the left-hand side, your edit fields, which is the data you're setting in the middle, and the output of this node on the right-hand side. You will notice that all string variables have this double quote before and after the value, whereas all numeric values or non-string values usually have no double quotes. Not usually, they always have no double quotes, and they just contain the actual value. Another thing to notice is you have 3 views to choose from. You have this schema view, this table view, and this JSON view. We'll cover what JSON is in the next video, but basically it just helps you visualize the data that you are setting. So here, one important thing to notice is if we could just come to the JSON view, if you look closely, the age is currently, we've set it as a number, right? And it's 25. So therefore, it does not have any double quotes around it. But technically, we could save this value as a string value itself and just have it be 25 as a string. So if we were to do that, and I now run this step, can you see how the color has changed from green to purple? And it also has the double quotes around it. So this means that we are saving our age value as a text instead of a number. Now, there's no right or wrong way. Usually you would assume it's a number, but saving it as a text variable is also not wrong. And you can 100% do that. It just depends on how you want to structure your automation or application. But yeah, that was to give you a high level idea of numbers and strings, which are the first 2 core data types that we were talking about. So numbers can also have decimal values. They can also be negative, and they are usually used to represent things like prices, quantities, timestamps, calculations, and age is another one. So this is how we use. So strings are mainly used for text data and numbers for numeric data. Next up, we have Boolean variables or Boolean data types. And basically, Booleans are used for binary representation. So if something is true or false, yes or no, we can choose to save them as Boolean values. So if we come back to our employee sheet, now is someone C-suite employee? And Boolean variables, what you will notice is they usually have this kind of variable name of is C-suite or is active or has address or something like that, wherein your logical answer is usually yes or no, true or false. And that's why we save them as Boolean values. So if we come back to n8n and we add a new field called is C-suite, and we change the type to Boolean, you will see by default it is false, but we have the option of setting it to false or true. Now in our case for John, he is a C-suite employee, so we're going to set this as true. If we execute this step, now you can see the is C-suite is also set to true. You can also notice that the true does not have double quotes around it. That means it's not a string value, it's a Boolean value. And if you wanted to save it as a string value for whatever reason, if we run this now you can see that the true value has double quotes around it, the color has changed to purple, and that indicates that it is a string value. We will change this back to Boolean, but that's to demonstrate a mistake to avoid. In case you wanted a Boolean value, then you can choose it, but if you were fine with a string, you can set it to a string as well. Next up, we have the array or list data type, and this is nothing but a collection of items enclosed in square brackets. So to give you a few examples, like fruits could be an array which contains multiple items in it, and we use indexing to refer to the position, and the position starts at 0, not at 1. So in this case, if we had an array of fruits, firstly the syntax used to represent an array is it starts with an opening square bracket, then it has a list of items, and then a closing square bracket. Each item is separated with a comma, and each item can be indexed by an index position which starts from 0. So let's look at an example. In our employee sheet for our hobbies, like John has 3 hobbies, so he has tennis, reading, and soccer. If I come in here and add a new field called hobbies and change the type to array, I will enter the opening square bracket first. Then, because these are text values, we're going to enter them as strings. So I'm going to come in here and enter tennis, reading. I'm going to enter a comma after tennis, open the double quotes again, enter the second string, which is reading, close the second string, add another comma for the third value. And here I'm going to enter soccer, which is the third value. And then I'm going to close this array with a closing square bracket. So once we have that, I'm going to run this. And now you can see that we have our hobbies as an array with 3 items. And now you can see we have our hobbies array with 3 items in it. If I was to add another node after this, so say I just added another edit fields node. Now, can you see that the input to this is the output of the previous node, right? So in the previous node, we had this ID, name, age, is C-suite, and hobbies, but hobbies was an array, right? So here you can visually see that firstly, this is collapsible, but secondly, it has 3 items in it. The first item is tennis, the second item is reading, and the third item is soccer. And it shows you hobbies of 0 because we indicated that our index positions, this is by default, and our index positions start from 0. So the first item is 0, the second item is 1, the third item is 2. And this is how it works. I know it can be a little tricky and confusing if this is the first time you're doing it, but basically you just have to remember it starts at 0. And so that's how we know that this is an array, and each array has, in this case, 3 values. So if we come back to our node, and you don't have to get too intimidated by this right now. The more we work with it, the more examples we'll do, the more familiar you'll get with it. And if you ever get stuck or have any questions, you can always post in the community, ask me via DM, or the best way to do it is actually just go to Claude or ChatGPT and just tell it, I'm having a problem with this data type, or I'm having a problem with this array. Can you please help me understand this like I was a 10-year-old? And it will do a fantastic job of explaining it to you. Anyway, coming back to our data types. So that is what an array is. Now, hypothetically, in Mike's case, he has no hobbies for whatever reason. If we wanted to indicate an empty array, we would just put our open and close brackets as such, hit execute. And now you can see that our hobbies has nothing in it. And if I came to this next step, can you see now our hobbies has nothing in it? So that's how to set an empty array. And now if I just come back to our n8n node and just set this though again to reading, close the quotes, enter our second item, which was soccer, and the third one was tennis. The order doesn't always really matter, but what you have to keep in mind is that the indexes change accordingly. So now if we submitted this form, we should expect that reading will be our index at 0, soccer will be our index at 1, and tennis will be our index at 2. So that's it for arrays. Next, we're going to look at what null represents and what objects represent. We're going to do a whole separate video on objects, which are specifically JSON objects, because that's the data format and the data type that all APIs and all web communication largely use. So we'll get into objects in a whole separate video in detail. For now, I will just give you a high-level introduction as to what objects are and also an example of what a null value is. So now I will come back to our Google Sheet, and now in our n8n node, we saw what a number was, a string was, a boolean was, what an array was. Now for our last field, we need to enter an address field. Now you're probably thinking this is the text field. I can enter it just as a plain text, as a string, which I'm going to demonstrate to you. So first, if we come in here and we choose address, we can enter it as a string, enter the full thing, click execute, all good. It shows you as an input that this is a string, all good. Now, as you get more comfortable working with n8n and the importance of using JSON and objects, some entities or some, say, columns that we talk about can be logically represented in a better fashion, right? An address may be represented as a house number, street, city, and state. So if we broke that up, we could actually technically have four separate columns as house number, street, city, and state. Technically, we could have that. And under house number, we would have 25A, here Main Street, here Adelaide, and here South Australia. Technically, this isn't wrong either. But because these actually form like a logical entity of an address, it would make sense to have them grouped together, if that makes sense. And even if it doesn't right now, once you start seeing patterns, and once I show you an example of what a JSON object is, you'll get more familiar with it. But always try to think of it as, do any columns form a logical representation, right? So in this case, because an address forms a logical representation of house number, street, city, state, and maybe country or pin code, it would make sense to group them all together into what is known as an object. So let's look at an object data type now. So if I come in here and I choose object, the structure of an object is similar to an array, which started with an open square bracket and ends with a closed square bracket. An object starts with an opening curly bracket and ends with an curly. And inside it, the same way arrays were separated by commas, the first item was separated from the second item, which was separated from the third item by a comma. Similarly, first object in an object, or the first item in an object, is separated from the second item in an object, and so on. So in this case, yes, like name and John forms one item, and this is a key value pair. So the key is the name, and the right hand side is the value, which is John. So if we think of it in terms of our Excel example, the columns kind of form our keys, which is name, and the rows form our values, which is John. So another example of a key value pair would be age and 25, is C-suite and true. And if you come in and now and look closely, the content here is nothing but an object. Why? Because it starts with an opening bracket here and ends with a closing curly bracket here. And inside, you can see that all of these items have that key value syntax, right? We have ID, which is the key. It's wrapped in double quotes. And then we have the value, which is 1. We have name wrapped in double quotes, second key, value is John. Third is we have age wrapped in double quotes as our key. We have the value of 25. You get where I'm going with this. Basically, each of our columns form the keys and each of our rows form the values. And even if you didn't completely understand this object example here, we'll cover a lot more in our next lesson when we talk about JSON. But this was, again, just to show you at a high level what objects look like and to try and reinforce it in you or show you another example. So if we come back to our employees, as we were discussing, this address forms a logical representation, right? That had these various parameters in it of house number, street, city, and state. So when we choose an object field here, what we can do is come up here and just enter it as a JSON object. So all objects start with an open bracket and end with a closed bracket. And inside them, they have a bunch of key value pairs. So if I enter our key as first we had house number, so house number followed by the value, which is 25A, which is a string value. So we're going to put it in double quotes. Then we're going to choose our next value, which is going to be the street. So again, we use double quotes because all keys have to have double quotes. So we're going to enter street and the value is going to be main street. After each item, we also put commas to separate them. Our third item is the street we already entered. Next up, we have city, which is Adelaide. Again, it's a string value. If we had, say, postcode as another one, and say this was a number, we would enter it just like this. We forgot our comma here for postcode. And again, for the last value, we have the state, which is South Australia. Again, that's a string value, so we wrap it in double quotes, close the string double quotes, and this is what our object looks like. Now we don't put a comma after the last item in the object. We leave it as is, and we will just make sure that we have that saved. And now if we execute this step, can you see that we have this address as an object, right? We have the opening curly bracket here, the closing curly bracket here, and inside it, we have a bunch of these key value pairs. We have house number as 25A. All house number, street, city, postcode, and state have double quotes or are wrapped in double quotes because they are keys. All keys must have the double quotes. The values which are on the right hand side of the colon, those can be any of our primary data types, which are usually numbers, strings, booleans, and in a more advanced example, we will see how they can be objects or they can be arrays as well. But in this case, yeah, we mainly have strings. So house number is a string, street is a string, city is a string, postcode is a number. We know it's a number because it does not have double quotes and it has just the number as is, and state is also a string, and that's why it's wrapped in double quotes. We can also visualize this in our schema format. Can you see hobbies and address? They look pretty similar. Firstly, they are both collapsible. That means they have multiple items in them, but hobbies has this hobbies 0, hobbies 1, hobbies 2, and that indicates it's an array with index positions, whereas an address has these house numbers, street, city, postcode, and state, which are keys, and we see the corresponding values across. So you can visualize it in the schema view. You can also see it in a table view as such, or you can see it in the JSON view, whichever you are most comfortable with. But that is how we would represent an object using our data types. And coming back to the instructions in our Skool community, The last data type as such to talk about is null, and it basically represents when we have no data. So for example, in here, say for Sarah's case, we did not have an address. In that case, instead of using this entire thing, we could leave it blank, and if we executed this, we would get an error because it's an object and it expects a value is what it says. So in this case, if we didn't have a value, we would just enter a null in there, execute this, and now we can see that the address, basically when you have a null value, it indicates some information is missing or you don't have it. So that's why it's just written as null. You can see that it does not have double quotes around it. So this is not a string. It is a special value to indicate nothing. So just to give you a few guidelines while working with data types, n8n does a great job of giving you like visual signs. So strings you'll always see are entered with double quotes around them. They're usually purple in color, at least for now in this version of n8n. Numbers are text without quotes, as we saw here, and they are usually in green. Then we have booleans, which are text without quotes, but can only contain true or false values, which we see in this dropdown. You can't enter anything other than true or false. Arrays always start with square brackets, like our example when we were entering hobbies in, and objects always start with curly brackets, which was our example as such, which was this address example, which starts and ends with curly brackets. And the last was null. Basically, it's in red and it indicates that this value was not found or there's nothing there, basically. One common mistake to avoid is usually sometimes you may save a number as a string accidentally or intentionally, and basically you may have like 123 as a number, but it's wrapped in quotes, so it's basically a string. And if you try adding these two numbers, like they're not actually numbers, they're strings, right? Because they have double quotes around them. What will end up happening is it will join the two together instead of adding them mathematically. So what you will end up getting is 1 2 3 4 5 6, because the 4 5 6 is just joined after the 1 2 3. Whereas if you wanted the 1 2 3 to be added mathematically to the 4 5 6, then you would have to do some conversion, like use a number function. So if you put number and then your variable name, that would convert it. That's a little out of scope for this introduction to data types. It's just something to keep at the back of your mind, because a very common mistake when you're just starting out with n8n is to just save numbers sometimes as strings. It may accidentally happen. And so if you get outputs that you're not expecting, say you tried to add a number, then this is likely why that may happen. Another couple of common error messages you may run into are cannot read property of undefined, cannot convert undefined to object, which is usually around you're either trying to access something that doesn't exist or there's some missing or wrong data type. In these cases, you don't have to panic. You can come into the Skool community and make a post about it. You can DM me directly on Skool, or you can just check in with Claude or ChatGPT, because they are fantastic at helping you debug these issues, and you likely get a much faster response from them. But that's completely up to you. The key takeaways here was color coding is your friend. Learn to read n8n's visual cues. They are fantastic. Test edge cases wherever possible. In our employees database that we were looking at, sometimes there will be missing values. How do you indicate them? You usually use null, or however you may choose to represent them. You could leave them as empty string values, but a best practice is to use null if there's no value in there, especially if it was an object. If it was a number, by default, you may leave it 0. If it was a string, you might leave an empty string, which is basically just opened and then closed double quotes. And if it was a Boolean value you were saving, you might set the default to false. And if we come back in here, yeah, just to remember, strings are with quotes, numbers, Booleans are without. Arrays need square brackets, objects need curly brackets, and if you're ever in doubt, you can always ask Claude or ChatGPT.